I think the first comic I ever read, I think it was a Amazing Spider-Man. It had Vulture on the cover. I remember that. And there was this like candy store in the neighborhood that used to sell comics, and they had the cool spinning rack that you never see anymore. And I would just, I had a cousin that was really into comics, and so he turned me on to John Byrne doing Alpha Flight and Teen Titans, George Perez was doing it at the time. And I remember there was an issue of Longshot that Arthur Adams did that, like I saw those 3 books like in the same weekend, and I was like, oh man, I kind of want to do this. So I would draw little boxes and start, telling little stories in them. And I was probably like 5 or 6 at the time. I would just go and, like check the spinning racks and see what was going on. And then a friend of mine that was like really an avid collector, he knew about this comic shop where the whole store was just comic books. And I remember his mom drove us there one day, and we were going through all the long boxes, and I think my head exploded. I realized I needed to save a lot of money so I could buy tons of comics. Like there was just so much, because I was used to like spinning racks at the candy store, and now there's this like entire store devoted to comics. I was pretty much drawing all the time. Like not exclusively comics, just, I was really into like D&D at the time too. And like, so all the illustrations on the player guides and monster manuals and stuff, I'd be like, I want to draw an owl bear. I would like copy like that red box where you see the guy from the back with the red dragon. I must have drawn that like 3 different times, like over the years as I was, like working on my art. I went to the High School of Art and Design, and I knew that art was probably the one thing that I was good at. So, and they actually had an internship with Marvel, and a friend of mine convinced me to go into it. I wasn't going to because I was trying to get my grades up for school, because I did not do well in school academically, so getting into college was going to be tough. And if you did an internship back then, you got like a pass or fail grade, but you couldn't use it to get your grades up or anything. I basically would just keep my terrible grades.
How did your parents, if you're not doing so well in school and you're focused on a creative passion, how did your parents react to that?
I think they just had like a wait and see attitude. I mean, they were supportive, and they thought it was cool that I could draw superheroes, and I was like obviously like better than most kids at it. I think they knew that, but it wasn't like, my dad was very much like, you should be a plumber or an electrician, you'll always need those, drawing superheroes is like cool, but what are you going to do with that? And I don't think they really understood it, but they were supportive. They were like, whatever, he's happy, just let him do it. And my mom would like joke about like, whenever I'd be in trouble and she'd send me to my room, it wasn't even like a punishment, because I literally never left my room. She's just like, just go back in there and draw. It was always just self-taught, I mean, I would buy books and see sort of what I can get from them, I mean, strangely, that book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, is actually pretty good. Like I would reference it, even as a working professional, I've still found there was like a lot of useful stuff in there. But I would buy like all the anatomy books and all the stuff that people tell you should, study. But for me, it was more just like studying other artists or anime. Like I remember when Laserdiscs came out and I could pause the screen and have it not be all shaky, and I could actually see the artwork crystal clear. I was like, wow, this is like, so I would watch like Street Fighter or Fatal Fury or whatever and see like the really crazy exaggerated poses and stuff, and it sort of got me wanting to do more, like push my style in a more animated direction. Stuff like that, but I never went to school for it really. I mean, the High School of Art and Design, we would draw like bowls of fruit and like hanging, drapes. But I would do comic stuff on the side. Like I would have unfinished tests, and on the back there'd be Hulk fighting Spider-Man. Like I had I'm sure I had like massive ADD, and I wasn't really, into school. So I was just draw all over everything. My homework would have drawings in the columns. And a lot of times like my teachers would comment on those. And so I kind of was like, well, I could go work in construction with my dad after I graduate, I guess. Or I could do this Marvel internship. And I did it, and they, were like, hey, this kid's pretty good. And they would occasionally, I was making like Xerox copies and getting people coffee and stuff, but when I would work with the artist's actual pages, and like I would be making Xeroxes, and I'm like, can I make some for myself? And they're like, yeah, that's cool. So I would just like take home like Jim Lee pages and Alan Davis, and I was just studying what they did, and I think it immediately made my stuff better when I was like working at the actual size they worked, and sort of like seeing how they laid out the pages and stuff like that. And some of the editors there were like, hey, we can kick you like a pinup or something, and so I started to get work there even when I was like still an intern. I was in high school, and they gave me like a back cover to Marvel Comics Presents, and then they gave me like an 8-pager, and then another 8-pager, and I was like, oh my God, I'm drawing comics, this is crazy. And the stuff is terrible. Looking back now, I'm like, wow, they were just real nice. But I remember the X-Men editor at the time was like, I don't want to tell you this because I don't want you to drop out of school, but when you graduate, we're going to give you an X title or something like that. And I was like, yeah, okay. And sure enough, like when I graduated high school, there was a popular character in some of the X books called Deadpool, and they were like, we're going to do a Deadpool miniseries. How would you like to do that? And that was probably my first big break. I had done some issues of Excalibur, some minor stuff like that, but Deadpool was like pretty popular, and it like sort of catapulted me. And after that, they gave me Uncanny X-Men, which was crazy. So I was like such a fan of it, like from childhood, and all the artists that were on it were like way out of my league. So I did not really feel like I belonged on that book, but and a lot of the fans didn't either. When they saw it, they were like, what is this weird anime garbage?
So did your parents kind of like realize like you had a potential career? That's when you did go to Marvel?
Yeah, I think at that point they were kind of like, hey, look, my son made a comic book, and they were like all excited about it. So yeah, and I always like was pretty independent, and I would just kind of do my own thing, and like I would not really ask them for stuff. So I think they were happy that like, all right, cool, he's set. If the Marvel thing didn't work out, I'd probably just work with my dad for a while and figure things out. Toward the end of my run on X-Men, like I knew that I was like kind of not feeling like superhero comics anymore. I was playing like a lot of RPGs and watching anime that was like Record of Lodoss War and like fantasy stuff basically. And I was like, damn, there's no comics like this in the US at all. It's like Conan or that's it. And so I was like, I kind of want to draw a fantasy book, and there wasn't really anything like that at Marvel, and they didn't really know. They didn't want me to leave X-Men, basically. I was like, I would do a Spider-Man story. Spidey's always been my childhood favorite, and they were kind of not feeling that, so I was like, well, I think I'm gonna go just try to do this fantasy book on my own. The very first idea was, it actually wasn't even, it was more about like these rogues basically, and they would sort of like chase battles and like pick the bones of the dead on the battlefields and like sort of loot them. They were like Tomb Raiders basically, and they would just follow like soldiers around and wait for the wars to be over and like pick their bones. And they eventually get an artifact that they shouldn't get, and they're hunted. But they were like 7 criminals or something. It was totally different, and that's where Battle Chasers came from. And I pitched it to Jim Lee at the time, and he was pretty excited about just like the verbal pitch. And there was a couple of other big name artists launching their books, and we did this cliffhanger imprint together. J. Scott Campbell, Berto Ramos, they did Danger Girl and Crimson, and we just sort of like launched our books together. And I was working with a guy, Munir Sharif, and he was just like a buddy of mine I met. He was in advertising, and he always wanted to write comics. So we would be like, wouldn't it be cool if, blah, and we'd brainstorm all this stuff. And I had a little sketchbook where I would like draw like, hey, what if this little girl was like as strong as the Hulk and she could just punch through walls and stuff. The tone of the book started to change. It was a lot more fun and lighthearted, and I knew I wanted to have like a weird range of characters that would be fun to draw, like not just like 7 humans, but like some big creature or like a robot. Like I wanted there to be like tech in there, and so that's where like Calibretto started to come together. I think you can probably, I think I've showed some of the early designs for the characters. They don't really look, you know, the same as I originally intended, but characters like Monica did. She's like the sort of Jessica Rabbit archetype, especially in the 90s. Like there was just like, every single comic had like these like hot girls in it, and I was just like, it was kind of ridiculous. So I put her in there to sort of be even more like cheesy than any other character around, and but she ended up like having a following even from like female readership, and I was like, oh man, she actually has potential to be a cool character, and I like quickly toned it down a little bit. Toward the end of the run, you can sort of see it. So I did that for years, and it did have like that, the schedule was kind of like whenever I felt like putting it out, I took my sweet time on it. It wasn't a monthly book. I never really promised that it would be monthly, but I just wanted each issue to be good. It took a few issues for the series to really take off. I mean, in comics, the shops can like, they take pre-orders. You get like a catalog basically each month, and retailers place their orders. So the publisher already has like a number that they can safely print that are already like sold. And so those sales were not great, but usually around the 3rd issue, or the 4th issue, people have already bought the first one, and they saw that it like sold out like that day. And then so around issue 3, the sales like had picked up considerably. And then issue 4 was the one where it was actually the #1 book in the industry that month. It was like ahead of X-Men, Avengers, everything. It was like Battle Chasers #1. I was like, oh, yeah. Because it wasn't, I didn't really expect it to break into the mainstream, really. I mean, I just wanted it to do pretty well. But it wasn't like a superhero comic, so I was okay with it not being in the top 10 or whatever. And it was pretty much always in the top 10, but that month when we snagged the 1 spot, it was like, whoa, this book is like competing with like the superhero comics. There were 9 issues of Battle Chasers, and I was working on the 10th one when I started working in the game industry. So it kind of like ended on a cliffhanger, which people remind me of constantly. It was just a lot of, you know, stuff that I had been dying to draw for years, and I finally got a chance to do it. And I always thought if I picked it up again, I would probably just scrap what I did and just start over on issue 10. And I didn't really know how the game thing was gonna go. I figured I would do it for like a few months and be like, wow, this is terrible. I had no idea what to expect. So it was a startup situation, you know, that can go well or badly, and it went badly. So I was like, all right. But I did stay. I decided to stay in games though and try to make it work. I had always been a gamer, you know, my whole life. Like I discovered games even before comics. Like I was just like always just playing games. It was my I would, even when I was doing it for fun, drawing felt a little more like work, whereas like playing games was like what I would do to just chill out and have fun with my friends or whatever. And so I was like pretty early, like starting with like Atari and Commodore 64 and then Nintendo and Sega. I was just like playing games all the time, but again, it didn't really, even when I became successful in comics and I would meet other, like gaming professionals, and they'd be like, hey, we have guys at our office that love your stuff, can you sign some comics for them? And I'd be like, what? You know who I am? And Jason Rubin mentioned Battle Chasers in an interview about Jak and Daxter and stuff, which I was like playing that game nonstop at the time. So one of my friends was like, dude, did you see this? And I was like, wow, like people know me in the game industry. And then one of those guys, a buddy of mine, Tim Donnelly, he was working at Black Isle at the time. He did this like fan art of Calibretto that was like CG, and he was like animating with like this cool lighting. And I was like, this isn't like some fan, like this guy's like a pro, obviously, somewhere. And so I emailed him, or whatever we had at the time, snail mail. I wrote him a letter, and I think he actually did send me a letter, actually, now that I think of it. But he was like, yeah, I work at this company called Black Isle, and I'm like, whoa. Like, I'm playing Icewind Dale right now. And he's like, oh, I like designed all those dungeons or whatever. And I was like, oh my God, I gotta be this guy's best friend. And at some point he was like, yeah, we're thinking about doing this startup and with some of these guys. And I was like, I'm in, let's do it. And yeah, like we did that for probably almost a year, just self-funded, and did lots of meetings. We started working on a playable prototype, but at the time we were using like licensed technology, which was not cool back then. Now it's fine because there's like, Unity and Unreal and like good ones. And back then it was like renderware and nobody wanted. They're like, oh, you're using renderware? Never mind. Because they were more excited about getting tech going, like, their own technology. And so that was one of the things that gave value to a little studio that was starting up stuff. And we didn't have that, we just had a cool idea. And a cool team, but we weren't proven, so it didn't take off. But one of the artists that we hired there started working with this guy, David Adams, in Arizona at his company Realm. And then they asked me to work on that game, and that's where I met Dave and Ryan and the guys that eventually ended up being the founders of Vigil. And we all just like stuck together after that and worked together for years.
Was the transition from like drawing for comics to games quite difficult, or was that a pretty easy transition?
It was a pretty easy transition at first, just because early on I was just pretty much doing concept art, and it was funny because like I didn't really know. I feel like I operate best when I don't really know what I'm doing. It's like, if I don't know that something's not possible, then that's cool. I'll just sort of like push it. Once I start having all these like limits, I'll like sort of be a little more conservative. But when I first started, doing the dragon kind stuff, we're like, yeah, we're just gonna make this Zelda-ish platformer, and it's gonna have all this cool stuff in it. I had no concept of like production or how many artists it would take to build this character, or like how long it would take to animate, whatever. I was just like shooting from the hip. And I did have some experienced guys around me that were, sort of reining me in a little. But when I got to work with Dave at Realm, he was just like, do whatever. I'm like, what about these two little mutant twins that are chained together? Yeah, that's cool. What about this like fat thing that vomits stuff all over the place and it's acid if you step in it? Cool. It wasn't really, I don't know, like the game we were working on, Trade Wars, which became Exarch, there was a lot of freedom, so I think I stepped into a situation that was like much easier than the norm if you went to work at Blizzard or whatever, and there's like this very established structure and hierarchy and like the way they do things. it would probably be a different story, you know, like as far as like your first time out. But I sort of lucked out that I was able to just gradually ease into it. And then the weirdest part for me was becoming an art director and telling other people what to do, because that's not something that I had never even really worked with other people before, except, you know, like an inker or a colorist on my comic stuff, where it was like very easy. Like, can that be like blue instead of red? Sure. You know, there wasn't really a lot of like, you know, I didn't have to be like as much of a team player, and I was very used to just being alone, you know? So I think the social aspect of working on a team was the strangest thing for me, not so much the job itself. My style, it's funny because a lot of like artists starting out always ask like, you know, I want to have my style, or how do I get a style? How'd you get your style? And I think the thing is to just keep working. I think it evolves over time. I mean, I guess you can say, I'm going to draw in this kind of style and just try to stick to it. But you know, for me, it was more based on what was influencing me at the time. And I had, you know, starting out with American comics and then like being turned on to anime and manga, just, it kind of like derailed me. I was like looking at Akira and Appleseed and stuff like that, you know, and X-Men. It was like, there were things that I liked about each of them, and like, I always try to figure out what it is that I like about, you know, certain artists or certain, it's like, oh, you know, I would have picked this shot, but now that I'm looking at Akira, you know, like, why does this feel like so much, you know, like it's moving, and why is it so dramatic? Oh, look, he turned the camera like slightly. It's like the character's like not centered, and like I would just like pay attention to stuff like that. And over time, it was really just like me selecting what got me excited, and then I would just drop the old way and adopt the new way. So I think, you know, I'm sure every artist does it, and we all are looking for inspiration on a daily basis. Still to this day, when I have my coffee, I'll like, you know, go through ArtStation or whatever and sort of like get motivated. You know, it's funny, it never really dawned on me to pursue it as a career. I just would do it for fun mostly. I didn't really think about like pursuing it as a career or anything like that. And then I don't know, my drawing started getting like decent and I just stuck with it. For me, I just like, there was no other course for me as far as I was concerned. I was just like drawing all the time, and it was fun. And then it turned into a job, but I wasn't planning for it. Why is this so funny all of a sudden? Hold on. Stop laughing, man. Everyone leave. I'm Joe Madureira. I'm the toilet flushing. I finally had my serious take, and then you flushed the toilet like right on cue. All right, here it goes. Why is it so funny? This is hilarious. All right. Ready? Stop. Dude, now you're laughing. Stop it. Everyone's laughing. All right. Okay, don't look at me. Where are his sunglasses? All right. You want to know who I am?
Yeah. You can tell me if you fucked it up.
We can't even get past this part.
We need Liam Neeson here.
I'm Joe Madureira. I am the CEO. You son of a bitch. So why'd you laugh? What the hell? I finally got it together. Okay. Just go stand over there.
Jake, you gotta do this interview.
Get in the corner.
All right.
I'm Joe Madureira. I'm the CEO and creative director at Airship Syndicate. Come on. What the fuck? I finally did it!
Come and do it.
Oh, God. No, you're good. No, we got it. Sit down. We got this. All right.
Okay,
Sorry.
one more for safety, because you
Yeah.
got through the whole thing, and then there was laughter. You got through it, but there was like smile. Tugging at you. You pause this shit, you're just like...